Story 1. This has been one exhausting week, and it was only Monday. I'm getting knots just recounting the whole situation. I don't know if this belongs here, but it felt right to share. I'm a 22-year-old person who identifies as non-binary, and I worked as a cashier at a very small grocery store in a tight-knit island community with fewer than 3,000 people. It was your standard minimum wage cashier job, but with a lot more responsibilities bundled in because only about 10 people worked there. I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about the job, mainly due to the constantly shifting schedule, early morning shifts, weekly restocks, and the difficulty of dealing with some of the community members who were often elderly, slow-moving, and, honestly, a bit frustrating. All of this for a paycheck that was less than the cost of a gaming console. But jobs here are practically non-existent, and I would take anything over waiting tables. I was just starting to get the hang of everything. That was until yesterday. I got dropped off at work around 6:50 am by my mom, and immediately, my boss came to the car and accused me of making passes at her husband on Saturday. He had been helping to package meats in the back deli. She did this right in front of my mom. Now, here's the thing. I hadn't spoken to her husband before or even acknowledged his presence. I had simply been going back and forth from the counter, delivering stickers for meat packaging. That machine was near my register. The only thing on my mind at the time was trying not to have a meltdown and focusing on doing my job. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I struggle to pick up on a lot of social cues. I'm also incredibly awkward, so I have no idea how they could have possibly interpreted my behavior as being flirty, especially with someone I didn't even know. I already have a girlfriend, and I'm not interested in men, especially not married men from my community, and certainly not ones who are older than my father. Both my mom and I were confused and shocked. She backed me up on everything I had said, but my boss wasn't convinced. She kept repeating things like, "I had to fire someone before because of this, and I'll give her one more chance." She also referred multiple times to an email she had sent on Saturday telling me the man was her husband. I had simply replied thanking her for the clarification and thought nothing of it. That was a giant red flag. I knew this was going to be a mess. My mom just told me to let her know if things got worse, and she'd explain the last incident later. So I went inside, and for the first few hours of my shift, this woman kept pestering me about the situation within earshot of customers while I tried to complete my daily tasks. She said things like, "Why did you reply to the email like that? Something is going on," or "You and your mom are lying about this." She even started asking me my age and told me to stop pretending not to be interested in guys. At one point, she even said, "Don't look at him," which was baffling, because that man wouldn't stop staring at me last Thursday when I was restocking the bread shelf. I avoided acknowledging him because I was just trying to do my job. It was incredibly petty and wildly unprofessional. She was being extremely passive-aggressive, constantly staring at me. It was unbearably awkward, and I was shaking from anxiety. I didn't understand what was happening, I just knew I felt extremely uncomfortable. It was only Monday, and she was already dragging my name through the mud out of pure insecurity. But since my mom was busy and we lived nearly 40 miles away, I had no choice but to tough it out until the end of my shift. My mom kept texting me to check in, making sure I was okay, and even mentioned that my dad said I needed to resign. When my shift finally ended, the financial manager, who also happens to be my boss's niece, came in. I like her, and she pulled me aside to say she had chastised her aunt for her unprofessionalism. She had seen the email and understood completely if I chose to resign. She even told me that the previous incident had been a complete disaster. I left the store, and on the drive home, my mom filled me in. A few months earlier, her boss's husband had actually cheated on a previous employee, and someone caught them in the act in the back of the deli. So not only was this situation about my boss's insecurities, but it was also about her willingness to throw me under the bus to protect an unfaithful man. We discussed our next steps, and I said I was going to resign. $230 a week was not worth dealing with this kind of stress, especially now that she had shown her true colors and proven how petty she could be. I pushed the situation aside for the moment. My mom got me a bubble tea, and I sent in my resignation email today. I received 2 responses. One came around noon and was pretty vague. The second one came about 30 minutes ago and looked quite long from the notification bar. I haven't opened it yet. I'm too mentally drained to deal with it right now. I eventually opened the long email later that night after calming down a bit with some tea and a movie. As expected, it was filled with self-justifications, vague accusations, and a complete lack of accountability. She never once apologized for how she treated me. Instead, she danced around the issue, implying that I had somehow caused confusion with my tone and presence. She wrote that she had only meant to have an honest and open discussion, and that if I felt uncomfortable, then that's unfortunate but unintentional. She doubled down on the idea that she was simply protecting her marriage and setting healthy boundaries. She also mentioned how difficult it is to run a business in a small town, and that employees need to be mindful of how their actions come across. There was no acknowledgement of how wildly inappropriate it was to confront me in front of my mother, accuse me of something untrue without evidence, or drag it out over several hours of my shift in front of customers. I felt gaslit just reading the message. I didn't reply. I had no intention of engaging any further. I had already resigned. I had already mentally checked out. But the longer I sat with it, the more it started to sting. Not just the accusations, but the realization that I had tried to be professional and respectful the entire time, and in return, I was treated like a problem, simply for existing in her space. The financial manager texted me privately later in the evening, just to check in. She told me again that she was sorry for everything, that she had spoken to her aunt at length, and that she completely understood my decision to leave. She even offered to be a reference for future job applications. That meant a lot to me. It's frustrating when you try to mind your business, do your job, and keep your head down and you're still targeted. All because someone else is insecure, and someone else is unfaithful, and they don't know how to handle the consequences of their own personal issues. I'm glad I left. I'm sad it had to happen this way, but I feel relieved. The job wasn't great, the pay was low, and I was constantly stressed out before all this even started. But this whole experience reminded me that no job, no matter how scarce they are in a small community, is worth sacrificing your peace or your dignity for. My mom said something that stuck with me. People who are that quick to accuse usually have something to hide. And honestly, she was right. I'm taking a few weeks to rest before I start job hunting again. I don't know what's next, but I know I deserve better than being accused, humiliated, and harassed for simply doing my job and existing in the same space as someone else's troubled marriage. Here's to better things ahead. Story 2. This story is kinda different, in the way that I, employee, witnessed a autistic young man, maybe 14 years old, get caught up in some crazy lady, I don't work here situation. Let me set the scene for ya. Working as a door greeter, watching out for lost customers and folks with returns, working in the lawn and garden section, I see this autistic young man. I guess he is autistic, as he seems predominantly focused on his action, and kinda has the actions of an autistic individual. This young man is sorting and moving potted flowers around, putting them in a very specific order, matching colors, size of pots, and height of the flowers themselves, doing an amazing job at it too, I may add. He is bothering no one and most folks are just noticing him doing a bang-up job. But this one old crone of a woman sees him working. She stands behind this young man, arms folded and tapping her foot. At first I was thinking maybe it was her son or someone she was shopping with, but the next thing she did proved to me I was mistaken. She clears her throat in that dreaded fashion we all know. Excuse me, you need to help me. The young man pays her no mind, continuing with his task. She doesn't like this. She clears her voice and replies louder. You are not listening to me. You are going to help me now. Before I can walk to her and ask her what she needs, she reaches out and grabs this young man by the right arm just above his elbow. I guess the sudden action of this and the young man's condition caused him to spin around and jerk his arm away from this lady, and the sudden movement startled the woman, causing her to step backwards and lose her balance, causing her to sit down on her butt. It was like in slow motion, watching her go from standing to sitting on the ground. By the time I reached the young man to see if he was okay, his mother had shown up and was asking what had happened. Before I could say anything, the woman who had caused this was up and berating this young man, saying he attacked her and she will have him fired and arrested. Meanwhile, this young man was almost crying and his mother was shocked. I told the mom to take her son and calm him down, that he has done nothing wrong and just make sure he is okay. Crazy woman didn't like that I took his side. She began to lie and tell me she was the victim and she didn't do anything, that the employee, young man, attacked her. I told her not so kindly that she was a liar and I had witnessed the whole incident. The young man you forcibly grabbed does not work here and you assaulted him. By now, a crowd has gathered, and the crazy woman has noticed that no one is giving her looks that they believe her side of the story. She just puts her head down and walks quickly out the store. When I turned to check on the young man and his mother, she was smiling at me and was thanking me for my help. She shops here regularly, and the young man likes to arrange the flowers. It's calming to him. I expressed my regrets about the whole incident. The young man walked over to me and pats my shoulder once and goes back to the flowers. The mom informed me that was the equivalent of a high five from him. That was it. Then they were gone. If this story doesn't qualify for this sub, just wanted to share. Story 3. My name is Michael. I was born and raised in Missouri. Going keep it short. Mom died when I was 13. Dad remarried. We moved in with my stepmom Linda and my stepbrother Luca, same age as me. Then everything went to crap. My father started overcompensating and became superdad to Lucas, which meant I had to be left in the dust. Over the years it became clear that Lucas was the priority, could do no wrong, and was generally the golden boy who deserved everything. Won't go into the details, because I am sure you heard it all before. Lucas was never openly hostile towards me, but definitely enjoyed his preferential treatment. At some point I decided it wasn't worth trying, and just focused on finishing high school. I had plans that would ensure I wouldn't have to deal with my folks after graduation, and just hoped things didn't get any worse. The final blow came shortly before graduation. Again, the short version. There was a college fund for me, which my dad and mom had set up before she passed. Lucas didn't have one. Guess what? Lucas got the fund instead, with my dad explaining over 40 minutes how he justified it. I wasn't really listening, but it was something about Lucas needing all our support and how they would assist me in other ways. In the end, this assistance meant that I would be allowed to stay in the family house until I figure things out. That actually worked in my favor, because I had already figured things out, but needed time to put stuff into action. What my dad seemed to have forgotten was that my mom had been an immigrant from Switzerland, and since Switzerland operated under citizenship by descent, I had inherited Swiss nationality at birth. I also spoke decent German, my mom having insisted on speaking it to me exclusively before she passed. I had started researching Switzerland and its universities when I turned 16. It was perfect. Tuition fees were a fraction of what the US charged. As a citizen, there would be no restrictions on work. The whole process took around half a year. Getting my passport, applying to my university of choice, saving up money for the first month there. It was fairly straightforward, but exhausting. After about 6 months, I simply walked out of my dad's house and left the key on the counter. Told them I would be leaving a week before that, which was acknowledged with a grunt and a shrug from Dad. I assumed we were thus done and parting somewhat amicably. I got my ass over to Switzerland and started my studies. My family never contacted me. The 2 first semesters were rough, and I didn't have time to socialize, be it in real life or online. But after that, things got bearable. Accordingly, I got back in contact with my buddies back home and started posting on social media again. Posts about my life, my studies, and random stuff. Big mistake. It took my folks merely 2 days to reconnect. I will have to abbreviate. Dad and Linda were extremely upset that I hadn't informed them about my plans, insisting that Lucas could have profited from this opportunity as well. Wasn't sure what they meant by that, but whatever. They inquired why I had kept this from them, why I just disappeared, why I didn't feel bad about it, and similar stuff. At some point I got fed up. Told them that it is how it is. They had their lives, I had mine, and that's that. They didn't like it and decided to double down hard. First, they tried to get Lucas Swiss citizenship as well. Didn't work, because citizenship is only passed down to direct descendants. Then they tried to get Lucas to transfer to my university. Didn't work either, because he didn't speak a lick of German. It was weird. These people never considered the world outside of our state to even exist, and were now suddenly hyper-focused on a foreign country they knew nothing about. Meanwhile, my friends back home informed me why Dad and Linda were acting out. Lucas had apparently started living large private apartment, car, partying, etc., and thus depleted the college fund, which would have easily lasted for the entire degree within record time. Now he was hanging on by the skin of his teeth, and they thought the route I had taken would somehow solve their issues. It didn't. The whole situation blew up completely when they convinced me to participate in a video call. I agreed. Me, Dad, and Linda were there. They started off laying out their various imaginary grievances again, talking about how Lucas deserved to profit from my opportunities as well. I swear, they used the word opportunity at least a gazillion times. I got frustrated and finally lashed out, telling them that it wasn't within my power to dish out freaking opportunities. Then they dropped the final crazy bomb. They informed me that, in order to support Lucas, we all had to make sacrifices. Thus, they expected me to interrupt my studies, return home, and start contributing to the family. Dad even said he would pay for my flight back. What a generous man. I almost got a brain aneurysm, but told them somewhat calmly that I was more than happy to oblige. Right after hell freezes over, this resulted in them losing their cool. Dad started shouting, Linda started sobbing, and me? I ended the call. I decided not to block them, but refused to take any calls. Now voicemails, texts, and emails are piling up, ranging from anger to guilt-tripping to gaslighting. I am still here, still studying. Anyway, that's my entitled parent story. If you have any comments or advice, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you have any questions about studying in Switzerland, I will be happy to answer those as well. Story 4. So, I've been quietly reading stories here for a while, and I finally decided to share my experience involving an entitled parent. This one is going to be a long ride, pun intended. When I was 16, I worked at the amusement park in my city. It wasn't huge, but it also wasn't exactly small. Most of our rides were targeted toward elementary school-aged children, although we had a few designed for older kids as well. Anyway, I was working as a ride operator, and on this particular day, I was assigned to a ride intended for older children. We had strict rules about height requirements if a child didn't meet them. They were not allowed on the ride under any circumstances, even if accompanied by a parent. The reason was that the ride only had a safety bar that went across the stomach, and if someone was too short, they could easily slip out. An entitled mother and her equally entitled child got in line. I could already tell from a distance that the child was way too short to ride, without even having to measure him. Since they were still a few groups back, I figured I'd wait until they got closer. Once I had loaded the current group, I approached her and explained that her child was too short for this ride, and I suggested they try the smaller version on the other side of the park. She looked at me with an expression that could curdle milk and said coldly, "We're going to wait here." I didn't push it. I had a schedule to follow, so I continued running the ride. Time passed, and eventually, they reached the front. I measured her son, and just as expected, he was at least 6 inches below the height requirement. Me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your child is too short to ride this attraction. I'd recommend the smaller version near the entrance of the park." Entitled mother. "No, it's fine. I'm with him, I'll hold him." She tried to shove past me to get on the ride, but I stood firm. Me. "I'm really sorry, ma'am, but we simply can't allow people under the height requirement on this ride. The safety restraints won't protect someone too small, and your son could fall." She rolled her eyes and asked to speak to my manager. I got that request a lot from entitled parents, so I called my team lead and politely asked her to wait off to the side while I loaded the next group. She was clearly offended and muttered that she shouldn't have to wait longer because I couldn't do my job. I chose to ignore the comment and focused on operating the ride. When my team lead arrived, he spoke with her and backed me up, explaining that for safety reasons, her son could not ride. By this point, the entitled child was full-on throwing a tantrum, rolling around on the concrete like a piece of bacon in a frying pan. I had to work hard to suppress a laugh. My lead apologized to her for the inconvenience, offered them a skip-the-line pass for the smaller ride at the front of the park, and then walked away. The entitled mother knelt down to console her son, who suddenly calmed down, smiled, and stood by the gate watching me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The line had gotten shorter, and I had a couple of empty seats to fill, so I resumed loading passengers. While I was doing safety checks, the entitled mother suddenly tapped me on the shoulder and thanked me for my help. That immediately struck me as odd. I turned to respond, and she began apologizing profusely, saying she regretted her behavior and shouldn't have acted that way, going on and on. I was stunned but told her it was no problem and wished her a good day. Then I looked back at the ride. I suddenly realized the entitled child was no longer standing by the gate. A strange feeling crept over me. I looked around but didn't see him anywhere nearby. That's when I noticed the entitled mother holding her phone up, camera pointed at the ride. That's when it hit me. I took my ride key and walked toward the attraction. Because it was a swinging ride, I couldn't see the back from my original position, but I had a strong suspicion about what happened. Sure enough, when I got there, I found the entitled child sitting in one of the back seats, and his expression when he saw me walking toward him said everything. He hadn't locked the safety bar correctly at all. If I had started the ride, he would have flown right out. Now I was furious, truly furious. If anything had happened, I could have faced criminal charges. I stared at him and told him firmly to get off the ride. He responded that he couldn't and needed help, which was understandable. Honestly, I still don't know how he even managed to sneak on. I helped him down safely, and as soon as his feet hit the ground, he sprinted toward his mother in tears. On the way, he tripped and fell flat on his face. He got up with a bloody nose and scraped knees, and that's when I knew I was in serious trouble. The entitled mother started screaming the moment she saw him. I rushed over to help, concerned that he might be seriously hurt. But before I could even reach him, she ran at me, slapped me hard across the face, and began shouting for security. I was completely stunned. Her yelling was loud enough to attract the attention of security, who came running over. The lead security guard, who will call us G, asked what was going on. "Security guard, what's going on here?" Entitled mother, "This employee assaulted my son. She threw him off the ride onto the pavement." Me, excuse me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she really expect people to believe I threw her son 10 feet off a ride? Entitled child, it's true. She punched me too. Security guard, would you like us to call the authorities? Entitled mother, yes, arrest her. She's mentally unstable. I stood there in complete disbelief, tears starting to well up. Just then, my team lead returned and asked what on earth was going on. Through sobs, I told him everything that had happened. What the entitled mother didn't count on, however, was the fact that around 15 other guests were on the ride and had witnessed the whole thing. Several of them immediately stepped up and gave their statements to the police, security, and my lead. As soon as the entitled mother realized that witnesses were coming forward, she grabbed her child and started running. Security caught her quickly, and I pressed charges against her for assault. Needless to say, I turned in my resignation that same day. After the entitled mother was apprehended by security, she continued her dramatics, screaming that I had set her child up and that the entire park was corrupt. It was honestly surreal watching her try to spin the story as she was being taken to the guest services office, with her child trailing behind her, still sniffling and clutching his nose. As for me, I was escorted to the staff building by my team lead and a supervisor. They gave me a bottle of water and a cold compress for my cheek, which was already starting to swell from the slap. I was still in shock, my hands were trembling, and I could barely process what had just happened. They had me write out a full incident report, step by step, while the guests who had witnessed everything were interviewed by park security. I later found out that more than 10 people gave matching statements confirming that the entitled mother had slapped me and that her son had snuck onto the ride after being told multiple times he couldn't ride. The security footage was the final piece of the puzzle. Cameras showed the entitled mother distracting me by tapping on my shoulder and apologizing, while the entitled child crept under the fencing and slipped into one of the empty seats at the far end of the ride. The footage also clearly showed her taking out her phone and pointing it at the ride, likely hoping to capture the moment her son went on it, despite the rules, maybe for social media or some personal gratification. Once all the statements were collected and the footage reviewed, the local authorities were called. The entitled mother was still insisting that I had pushed her son, even as multiple security officers, my team lead, and eventually a police officer explained that there was video evidence proving otherwise. She changed her story multiple times, first saying I threw him, then saying I scared him into running and falling, then saying I purposely humiliated them in public. But with the video, the eyewitnesses, and the blood on her child's face clearly caused by his fall rather than an impact from me, her accusations crumbled. In the end, she was detained and charged with assault. I was given the opportunity to file a formal complaint, and with support from my lead and several coworkers, I did. I had a follow-up meeting with Human Resources, who offered to relocate me to a different section of the park temporarily while things settled down. But honestly, the whole situation had shaken me so badly that I didn't want to be anywhere near that place anymore. I handed in my resignation letter that same evening. It wasn't because I hated the job, I actually loved it most days. It was fun working with kids and families, and I had some great coworkers. But the idea that I could have been blamed for something so serious because of one entitled mother's selfishness and dishonesty made me realize just how vulnerable I was in that role. All it would have taken was one less camera, or a few fewer witnesses, and I might have been the one in handcuffs. To this day, I still think about that moment. I don't blame the entitled child as much. He was just a kid acting on his mom's manipulative encouragement. But the entitled mother, she knowingly put her child in danger, tried to manipulate the situation to make herself look like a victim, and physically assaulted a teenage employee just trying to do her job. I've since moved on to a different job, one with much less direct confrontation, and with stronger protections in place for employees. Every now and then, I hear stories from friends still working at the park, and the entitled mother, she's banned for life. Her face is in the system, and if she ever tries to come back, security has the authority to remove her immediately. I still keep in touch with my team lead, who checks in on me from time to time. He told me I handled the situation better than most adults would have, and even though it ended in chaos, I did the right thing every step of the way. If there's one lesson I took from all of it, it's this: rules exist for a reason, and no amount of whining, lying, or entitlement should be allowed to compromise safety. Story 5. Title: Entitled Mom Steals Our Wings, Gets Burned by Karma. This happened quite recently. I went over to a friend's house yesterday for a sleepover. We were taking the proper precautions, such as wearing masks and washing our hands quite often. About halfway through the night, my friend and I got a mischievous idea. We decided to order 32 boneless wings coated in the restaurant's hottest sauce from a place called Wings Etc., and we would have a competition. Whoever ate the most wings without drinking any milk would be declared the winner. In case you didn't know, their hottest option is called wall sauce. It's a habanero-based sauce that can be served either on the wings or on the side. We chose to have it on the wings. Once we placed the order, we waited. About half an hour later, the food arrived. My friend's mom was sitting on the couch when the delivery came, and my friend grabbed the bag and took it upstairs. We opened the box and started the competition. Friend, 10 wings. Me, 8 wings. I ended up taking the loss, but I was a good sport about it. We put the leftover wings in the fridge and played video games until it was time for bed. The next morning, we woke up and headed downstairs for breakfast. We were chatting at the table when the entitled mom, my friend's mother, walked over to the fridge and pulled out the box of wings. Friend. Hey mom, by the way, those are the wings we ordered last night. Her. So. Me. We bought those with our money, so they're ours. Her. Excuse me? That's no way to talk to an adult. Me. I'm just saying those wings belong to us. What's wrong with the way I'm talking to you? Her. These are my wings. Me. No, they are not. My friend and I bought them with our own hard-earned money. They are not. Cutting me off. Her. You're being unreasonable. These are mine. They were in my fridge, so they're mine. I wanted to try reasoning with her, but then something clicked. These were hot wings, wall sauce level hot. What if I just let her take one? Sounding slightly annoyed, I said, fine. My friend started to argue, but I stopped him. It's fine. Let her have the wings. The entitled mom gave a smug little smile. She thought she had won. In reality, she was about to get a serious lesson in karma. She put the wings in the microwave, heated them up, and brought the plate to the table. Me? I should warn you, those wings are… Cutting me off again. Her. Your generation is so spoiled. I might call your mother and tell her you're not welcome here anymore. She popped 2 of the fiery wings into her mouth. At first, she smiled proudly as she chewed, but that smile didn't last. Very quickly, her confident look melted into panic. She looked around in distress, clearly searching for something to drink as the discomfort set in. Her face started to turn red. Her. Why are these wings so ridiculously hot? She rushed to the trash can and spat out the orange, mushy remains. She was fanning her mouth frantically and started to panic even more. She yanked open the fridge and began chugging the milk straight from the container. My friend and I were trying our hardest not to burst out laughing. The problem was, she had gotten the sauce on her lips while spitting out the food. Now she was trying to get rid of the burning sensation. She was muttering in frustration, crying, and clearly in pain. She was a total mess. Her nose was running, she was in tears, and she was acting as if this was the most traumatic thing she had ever experienced. You had to see it to believe it. She ran into the bathroom, and the next 5 minutes were hilarious. Her from the bathroom. I'm dying. Call emergency services. I'm dying. She was having a complete meltdown. My friend whispered that I should grab my wings and head out. So, that's exactly what I did. Update. The entitled mom ended up calling my mother. She falsely accused me of stealing her wings and exaggerated the entire situation. She claimed I was being rude, using inappropriate language, and being disrespectful, none of which was true. She even threatened to get law enforcement involved. Fortunately, proving my innocence was easy. I pulled up my transaction history and showed my mom that I had paid for the wings myself. I told her exactly what happened, and my friend backed up my story completely. After hearing everything, my mom decided that from now on, if I wanted to hang out with my friend, it would have to be somewhere else and definitely not at his house. Honestly, I couldn't blame her for making that decision. The whole thing was absurd from start to finish. What kind of adult steals food from 2 teenagers, especially something as spicy as habanero wings, and then tries to twist the story to make herself the victim? The more I thought about it, the more baffled I became. It wasn't just about the wings, it was the entitled attitude. The assumption that because the food was in her fridge, it automatically belonged to her, regardless of who actually paid for it. And when the natural consequences of her decision hit literally, she doubled down and tried to shift the blame. My friend texted me later that day and said his mom was still mad. Apparently, she'd spent most of the afternoon complaining about her lips burning and how kids these days are so disrespectful. He told me she even blamed us for sabotaging her, as if we had somehow set her up to fail instead of simply letting her take what she insisted was hers. We had a good laugh about it over text. It turned into an inside joke between us. Anytime something mildly inconvenient happened, we'd say, "Why are these wings so spicy?" and send each other laughing emojis. What really stuck with me, though, was how quickly she tried to turn the situation into something serious by contacting my mom and threatening to call law enforcement. That kind of overreaction could have caused real problems if we hadn't had proof of the purchase and a clear timeline of events. It made me realize just how important it is to keep records of things like that, even when you're just trying to have a fun night with a friend. My mom wasn't mad at me at all, thankfully. She believed me from the start, but appreciated that I showed her the transaction receipt and explained the situation honestly. She even chuckled a little when I told her how the woman ran screaming into the bathroom. But she stood firm on her decision. If I wanted to hang out with my friend again, we'd meet somewhere neutral like a park or a cafe, not at his house.